It's a dark and stormy night. You race for your door, rain beating on your back. Your porch light is out, so you have some trouble finding your keys. But no worries, somebody's already begun to get the door for you. There's only one problem. You live alone. Hello and welcome. My name is John, and today we're exploring Mount Misery. So grab your crucifix and bundle up some wolfsbane. This is Moonlight Madness. Mount Misery wasn't always known by its ominous name, but its origins are much less sinister than one might think. Early settlers to Long Island found the area particularly difficult to traverse due to its hilly terrain and steep incline. Throw in some horse-drawn wagons and big wooden wheels, and it's easy to see why Mount Misery stuck. One of the highest points on Long Island, Mount Misery could once give you a clear view to Connecticut. That was in the days back before industrial development, as the area was settled in the 1600s and began its life as a small farming community. Later, it would play host to President George Washington and is the birthplace of poet Walt Whitman. Like the Grady twins in The Shining, Mount Misery and Sweet Hollow Road run parallel to one another, terrifying residents of Huntington, Long Island for years. As we learned in our last episode, the Native American tribes who lived here before the early settlers believed the land to be cursed. Obviously, these warnings did nothing to deter those settlers from developing the land, but with the history that follows, I'm sure they wish they would have taken a little bit more stock in the warnings they've been given. Back in the day, a psychiatric hospital was seen as a dumping ground for relatives who'd become too much of a burden. If their outbursts became too much to deal with, or their bouts of depression were causing too much of a strain on a marriage, they were sent off to psychiatric hospitals like trash to a dump. For some, it was an easier solution to their perceived problem, no matter how bad conditions were for their loved ones. By most accounts, one such psychiatric hospital was built near Mount Misery in the 1800s. The stories vary, but the most common iteration speaks of a young psychiatric patient who was distraught after the loss of her child. One night, after lights out, she began wandering the halls of the hospital. No one knows where the matches came from or how she got her hands on them, but she lit fires in each room as she passed. By the end of the night, hundreds, including the young lady who started the fire, burned to death inside the building. Even more died on the lawn as they tried to escape the flames. About 5 years later, a new hospital was built in its place. Conditions were just as horrendous as in the last one, but it didn't account for the smell of burning bodies that lingered through the halls, or the screams that could be heard at night. Only 6 short months after the hospital opened, it too burned to the ground, though the source of the fire could never be accounted for. And so the land was finally abandoned. It seemed that this time those in charge finally got the hint. And besides, who would want to really test out the theory that a third time's the charm? It's here that we find a connection to Sweet Hollow Road. Sources say that the patient who started the fire can be seen walking down Mount Misery Road at night. She's said to have been seen wearing a white gown that seems to glow in the moonlight. Sound familiar? Sweet Hollow Road's lady in white seems to bear a striking resemblance to the psychiatric patient, leading some to believe that they're one and the same. It seems likely that the connection was drawn from Mary's grave. Near Mount Misery lies a cemetery. In that cemetery lies a headstone, and on that headstone is one single name, Mary. And while Sweet Hollow Road's Lady in White is said to have been killed after being struck by a vehicle, it's thought that her name was lifted off of this very headstone. It was 1967 when the lights returned to Mount Misery. It's said that, like with many of the area's superstitions, the tales of the lights in the sky were passed down from the Native Americans. But it wasn't just the lights in the sky that they were afraid of. They spoke of a beast that stalked their people in the woods. A beast with glowing eyes who brought with him fire in the sky. In '67, though, the lights weren't the only thing being reported. An elderly woman who lived atop Mount Misery reported getting a strange visit from two men after a particularly frightening thunderstorm. She described the men as having abnormally high cheekbones and skin that looked to be badly burned, and she was shocked to see that they had no vehicle. She was quoted as saying, "They must have walked up that muddy hill, but their shoes were spotlessly clean. There was no trace of mud or water when they walked into my house." She also reported that the two men mentioned to her that the land belonged to them and that they, quote, "were going to get it back." These strange visits have been reported by many residents of the area and always seem to follow violent thunderstorms. These men will always visit in pairs and often ask, "Did you see anything strange in the sky after the storm?" It's said that they've even gone as far as leaving threatening messages for a local radio host of radio station WBAB after she'd reported a UFO sighting during one of her broadcasts. An inhuman metallic voice extended an invitation to discuss her sightings in person. She decided to decline the invitation, though I couldn't imagine why. Driving down the road at night, there's a feeling of something electric in the air up on Mount Misery. I found it nearly impossible to keep my eyes on the road as I scanned the skies, and kept watch on the trees to see if there were eyes staring back at me. Was I looking for proof to be able to pass these stories off as nothing more than folklore? Or was I hoping for a glimpse of the beings that have laid claim to this land for hundreds of years? Whatever the case may be, one thing is for sure. The true magic of Mount Misery is the lasting impression that she leaves on you. Thank you all for joining me for another episode of Moonlight Madness. If you enjoyed this episode, leave a thumbs up, hit subscribe, and follow us on Instagram at moonlightmadness_TV. And so, until next time, this has been John reminding you to keep that crucifix handy and beware the moon.